Hey folks, today I'd like to illustrate an application of the Chandralagna concept. And to do that, I want to use the chart of Sam Bankman-Fried, the former CEO of FTX, the cryptocurrency trading platform, who was last week arrested in the Bahamas, jailed, and held for extradition back to the US, where he's going to be tried by the Southern District of New York for charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and any number of other charges, serious charges, which could see him spend years in prison. This is a distinct fall from grace in every respect for this fellow. He comes from an esteemed, academic family. Both of his parents are professors at Stanford University in California. Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, as he is sometimes called, was singled out in his youth as being, something of a mathematical prodigy. Attended any number of, high-level courses, and went on to, be quite successful, in the financial sector. In 2017, he created an enterprise called Alameda Research, which was basically set up as an arbitrage company trading on disparities of Bitcoin between North America and Japan. And then in 2019, he created the FTX trading platform, and that attracted, the interest of crypto traders all around the world, not only for Bitcoin, but Ethereum and Solana and any number of other cryptocurrencies that, have become very popular. So popular that his trading platform was the go-to place for any crypto traders. Early in 2022, his personal assets hit a high watermark. He was worth $26 billion. But since the spring of 2022 and into the early fall, crypto has taken massive hits, such that his net worth dropped from 26 billion down to about 10 billion. And then just in the last couple of months, when it was discovered or the public became aware that FTX had a solvency crisis on his hands, in one single day, SBF lost 94% of his net worth, from 10 billion down to less than $1 billion in the space of one day. Now, as I say, and along the way, billions of dollars of investor monies have disappeared and cannot be accounted for. So he's in really deep trouble and has got a lot of questions to answer from the commodities trading officials that monitor this sort of thing. So, as I say, as we speak, he's held without bail in the Bahamas and will soon be heading off to New York to face very, very serious charges. So, I thought we should have a look at his chart, and let me, switch over at this point to do that. Okay, so here is Sam Bankman-Fried's chart displayed in South Indian on the left side, North Indian on the right side. Now, he's born in Stanford, California, 6th of March, 1992. Birth time unknown. So this chart has been calculated for noon. So here's the ascendant, for noon in Gemini, and you can see the sun high in the sky, a little bit west of the meridian at the time of birth. Now, that's not terribly useful when we don't know the birth time, but one thing we can do, if we're assured that the moon will not change sign during the day of birth, we can switch to Chandralagna chart and have a look at that. Now the question is, if a person is born at noon, and if they were, well, if we've calculated the chart for noon, but they were born anytime in the morning or anytime in the afternoon, evening, could the moon have moved enough to, leave the sign in which we currently see it for noon hour? Well, okay, so here you can see for noon hour, moon is at 18 degrees 42 minutes of Pisces. So do the math. If he were born even as early as a few minutes after midnight, in other words, 12 hours earlier, how far does the moon move in 12 hours? Roughly 6 degrees. So in that case, the moon would only back up to maybe 1242 of Pisces. What if he were born later into the afternoon, into the evening? What if he was just born just minutes before midnight, late in that day? Well, that would be 12 hours later. But then again, the moon can only move 6 degrees. So that would advance the moon to say, let's 24 degrees and change in Pisces. So the point of all this is the moon will not be leaving Pisces on the 6th of March. This chart, as I say, is calculated for noon, and that's really just to get the average position of every planet involved here, but the moon in particular, and then we can judge whether the moon will have left the sign if the birth time was as much as 12 hours earlier or later. So it's not going to do that. So now we can take this chart and simply rotate it. So I'm working with Parashara's light here, which is kind of cool in that sense. We can easily do this. I can just click on this sign where the moon is and say rotate the chart to this house. And voila, the entire chart rotates, placing the moon in the ascendant. And this is now what we call a Chandralagna chart. Now, for the moment, you can ignore the ascendant that's indicated in this chart. That's no longer the ascendant. That's a hypothetical ascendant if you were born at noon. We have no idea, so we're just going to ignore that, and now we're simply going to work with the Chandralagna chart with the moon in the first house, and we're going to interpret the whole chart as it is, as if Pisces really was the ascendant. And in fact, this is all we can do with an unknown birth time. It's different from what Western astrologers will often do. In lieu of a birth time, they will use a sunrise chart, or they will simply use a noon chart. I'm starting with noon to calculate planetary positions, but then I'm rotating the chart to place the moon in the first house. Why? Because the moon is, after the ascendant, the moon is the most dynamic point in the chart, that point which moves most quickly. It's only 1 degree every 2 hours, but still. All right, so here's our launch point: Pisces ascendant, Mercury and moon in the first. Now, when I tutor students regarding identifying potential career outlets for individuals, I encourage them to always look and see what lies within the kendras. And so in this case here, what we see is moon and Mercury, Rahu and Ketu. And I always suggest as well to look for commonalities that you can hang some kind of tag on. One of those things is a knowledge of the caste system in Hindu culture. And once you know that, you would recognize that moon and Mercury are both of what we call the Vaishya caste in Hindu society. Now, Vaishya is a merchant class. It's people who buy, sell, and trade. So it's all related to commerce in one way or another. Now, it's quite literally true in his case. That may not play out so perfectly in somebody else's chart, but it's interesting that we've got a handle on this right away. What about Rahu and Ketu? Well, Rahu and Ketu are associated with things that are foreign, strange, offbeat, somewhat peculiar or dodgy or whatever. Let's just start with the foreign. You could say foreign exchange of any kind. You could say import-export of any kind, because it involves transition of goods and monies across borders. You can think of possibly pharmaceutical or anything in the that sort of business. High-tech arena as well too. And bingo, we've got a hit there. And even with the foreign exchange in a way, Bitcoin, was originated in Japan, and now it's a worldwide currency, sort of dark web currency in a way. But there you go. And it's also a bit nebulous and insubstantial as well too. Such is the nature of Rahu and Ketu, kind of mysterious, shadowy, hard to get your hands on, hard to get a grip on. Indeed, Bitcoin is like that because it has no real tangible backing. Like, currencies for most countries are backed by gold deposits or something else. Bitcoin is quite something different. Anyway, and then the last but not least is sort of dubious products of some kind, like snake oil salesmen, that sort of thing, something dodgy, suspicious. So in summary, we have this potential for commerce of some sort with a high-tech component, something of a shadowy kind of product, and a dubious reputation, all told. Okay, all well and good. Now, an important thing to do with all grahas in a horoscope is to assess their strength or weakness, what we refer to as avastas. In Western astrology, dignities or debilities. Let's have a look before we leave the Kendras at Moon and Mercury. Now, coincidentally, these two are what we call conditional benefics, which means we like to regard them as benefics, from the get-go, but they must pass a test as to whether they truly are. Now, for the Moon, it comes down to simply a matter of brightness. So if the Moon is dark, it will be considered weak and malefic actually. So have a look here. The Sun is at 22 degrees, 23 degrees Aquarius. The Moon is at, let's say, 19 degrees Pisces. Between those two, that's only 28 degrees. That's about 2 tithys, or 2.5 days movement from new moon. Now that's just a little sliver of a moon to be seen. So that's definitely a dark moon. And as a consequence, we will call this moon both weak and malefic. Then we move to Mercury. Now Mercury's test is different. Basically, Mercury, we give it the benefit of the doubt, say it's benefic if it's on its own, or it's benefic if it's associated with or aspected by benefics, which it is not in this case because the moon now has become a functional malefic. Mercury, if it is influenced predominantly by malefics, which it is here in this case, it receives an aspect from Saturn alone, a natural malefic, and it's associated only with the moon, which by this test for the moon's quality has judged the moon to be malefic as well. So Mercury then becomes malefic too. So both Moon and Mercury are malefic. Furthermore, they're both weak. So the Moon because it's dark, and Mercury because it's debilitated in Pisces. So we have these two planets that are associated with commerce, and yet they are both weak, which implies, something like building a house of cards, and you can get it to quite a height. But if, the components are weak, a flick of the finger may bring that down. So, this leads us to, be a little wary of the setup that arises here. Meanwhile, we go forward and we look for yogas that exist in the chart. Now, for a Pisces ascendant, the Moon is the 5th Lord. And for a Pisces ascendant, Mercury is the Lord of the 4th and Lord of the 7th. So Mercury is a double Kendra Lord, and the Moon is a single Trikona Lord. In a stroke, their association creates two Dharma Karma Adipati yogas, one of which is a true Raja yoga, Lord of the 4th with Lord of the 5th. But, as I said, both Moon and Mercury are weak by virtue of darkness and debility, respectively. Therefore, the yogas, which promise success of some kind through a combination of effort and good fortune, it's a bit like these yogas are built on shifting sand and perhaps not dependable for the long term. Sort of an inherent weakness that may lead to their collapse, as I alluded to earlier with the House of Cards. Nevertheless, we move on and see what else we see in this. Now we can look, for somebody who's in the currency trading business, it's natural to look for dhana yogas. Now the traditional way for dhana yogas to be formed is to look for the money lords. So the money houses are houses 2 and 11. The house of, money in the bank versus income, 2nd and 11th respectively. Now as it happens in this chart, the lords of the 2nd and 11th are Mars and Saturn respectively. Okay, so we call them the money lords or dhana lords. Now, in order to form a dhana yoga, you need to combine a money lord, lord of 2 or 11, with one of the Trikona lords, which for this Pisces chart would be hypothetical ascendant Pisces. The Trikona lords are Jupiter for the 1st, Moon for the 5th, and Mars for the 9th. Now, what we find is we do have this magic combination where we take Mars as being the lord of the ninth, a Trikona lord, and Saturn being the lord of the 11th, a money lord, and they can combine and form a valid Dana yoga. Ka-ching! All right. Now, can we use Mars twice as being both the lord of the second and the lord of the ninth? No, we can't. We have to have a separate planet for each class of house lords that we're bringing in. Money lords and Dharma lords, houses of 1, 5, and 9. So we only get one Dana yoga out of this, which is that combination of Mars and Saturn. But look how strong they are. Saturn is in its own sign, Capricorn. That's wonderful. Mars is in Capricorn where it's exalted. That's wonderful too. So that makes for a very powerful Dana yoga. Furthermore, formed in the 11th house. So the two money lords are in the 11th house, and Mars as a Trikona lord has, is one of those pair. So this really looks stellar, and it may have accounted for much of his significant wealth that he, amassed in the last, 5 years. But look a little closer and you will see a fly in the ointment. Note the degrees of Mars and Saturn. Now, in the North Indian chart, the minutes are a little bit cut off, but you can, right there, but you can refer over here to the South Indian chart and see easily that Saturn's at 1944 of Capricorn, Mars at 1948. So these two are separated by a mere 4 minutes of arc. Now, any two true planets, by which we mean Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, or Saturn, within 1 degree of zodiacal longitude, they will form graha yuddha, which is translated as planetary war. Two planets basically stepping on each other's toes within a very, very close orb. These two are incredibly close. Now, to judge the winner or loser of a planetary war, it involves, 3 different possible criteria. The most significant of which is brightness, and then elevation or declination, and last but not least, speed. Now, it's not necessary to do that full analysis of winner versus loser, because in a protracted battle, in any war, often there is significant damage on both sides. So, collateral damage to both combatants. And you can take the example of 2 heavyweight fighters who have to do their entire 15 rounds without scoring a knockout, and they're judged on points at the end of the night. One will be judged a winner, but at the end of the night, they both feel like hell because they've been pounded like crazy for, a space of an hour and a half or whatever. And so they feel, quite miserable. In a planetary war in a chart, we need not obsess over the winner. The very fact that there is a war does damage to both parties. Now that damage can be then, you can trace it to the lords, to the houses which those planets own. And you can also simply, anticipate damage in the very house where they fight their battle. It's like you throw a party in, somewheres after midnight when everybody's had a bit too much to drink, a fight breaks out in your kitchen. And before you can separate the combatants, probably some stuff has got broken in the kitchen. The collateral damage in the very place that the war occurs. So in this case, Mars and Saturn fight their war in the 11th house. And therefore, income is one of those areas in which the damage might very well be done. But if you want to extend it to lordship as well too, we're right back in the same place. Mars is the lord of the second house, money in the bank. Saturn is the lord of the 11th house for income. Saturn also happens to be lord of the 12th, which is jail and incarceration. And Mars happens to be the lord of the 9th, which is, violation of the law. And all of this, amazingly enough, comes to a crescendo in this planetary war that exists between the two money lords in one of the houses of money. And basically, although this dhana yoga looks so impressive, closer scrutiny reveals planetary war, and graha yuddha damages both combatants, such that again this yoga can be seriously hollowed out from the inside, and which seems to be what we're seeing now in real time. The last thing that I want to point out, just in terms of yogas, is note the Moon-Jupiter relationship in this chart. Now, when Moon and Jupiter are in a 6-8 relationship, this forms what is called Shakata Yoga. Shakata translated as something like a broken wheel on an old cart. Think back to medieval times there when carts were made of wooden, carts had wooden wheels. There's a big chunk of it missing. And so as, the cart moves along, the wheel turns, it goes ka-thump, ka-chunk, ka-thump, ka-chunk. And for whoever's riding in that cart, it's a pretty bumpy ride. And so this Shakata Yoga often implies a bumpy ride of some sort, often in the financial, part of a person's life. And so many a client with a Shakata Yoga is well advised to, have a budget, spend within your means, save for the rainy day, don't get too beyond yourself, and, have good accounting of your affairs so that you know quite accurately where you stand. And that's a way not to get in trouble. Well, the fellow that took over, his name is John J. Ray III. He was a temporary CEO for the energy giant Enron when it collapsed from its own financial chicanery some 2 decades ago. And he had to sort of put that company kind of back on its feet in some respects, at least until it could be broken up into receivership. And now that he's taken over FTX as a temporary custodian, he said he's never seen such a mess of accounting. So it's quite abysmal, almost amateurish money management and accounting. So goodness knows what's happened to the many billions that have disappeared along the route. Anyway, the point of all this was simply to illustrate, even in the absence of a birth time, we can often tease quite a bit of meaning out of a chart, using it as a Chandralagna chart, so long as we can be assured that the moon will not change signs during that day of birth. You can then calculate a noon horoscope and then simply rotate the chart to put the moon in the first house, and then pretend that that's the real chart and go ahead and interpret on that basis. So I hope this has been an illuminating example, and I encourage people, when you have, subjects of interest in the media, you can have some fun with this, even without knowing the birth time. Okay, good enough for now. Okay, so hopefully you found that a useful exercise in Chandralagna chart analysis. So just a quick recap. To do this, for any other celebrity you might be interested in, calculate the chart for noon, because you have no other time, in the location the person was born. Once you have that, look to see whether the moon will stay within the sign for the range of time, 12 hours before or after noon. And if so, then you've got a valid candidate for a Chandralagna chart. Then rotate the chart to put the moon in the first house, and then conduct, some kind of analysis, graha, vichara, to, note planets that are strong, weak, ordinary, mixed condition. Identify any yogas that may exist from the point of view of that, adopted ascendant. Assess those, as a consequence of, strength or weakness of grahas. And, draw your conclusions. Do not try to get into dasha analysis, because if your birth time is 6 or 7 hours away from noon, let's say, that's going to be 3 degrees and change for the moon in movement. That's a pada. That's a quarter of a nakshatra. And if the moon is that uncertain, I mean, then you could be a quarter of the way or a half a way or three-quarters of the way through a dasha and not really know where you are. So don't try to get into dasha analysis with this kind of Chandralagna chart. You could entertain, looking at other things. I mean, in Vedic astrology, we don't obsess over things like Saturn returns, but I couldn't help but notice that, Bankman-Fried had his within the last year. And in fact, more to the point, there was another planetary war of Mars and Saturn by transit in the sky in the late degrees of Capricorn on the 4th of April. Now, this echoes the very planetary war between Mars and Saturn a little bit earlier in Capricorn in his chart. And lo and behold, along comes another Mars-Saturn planetary war, 4th of April, 2022. And if you look back at, the graphs for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, that was pretty much the high water mark for cryptocurrencies. And after that, they began an irrevocable slide into October. And then, of course, his trading platform, FTX, ran into solvency problems, and now he's in jail. End of story. Okay, well, again, I hope you found this instructive, and encourage you to experiment with Chandralagna charts when the circumstance warranted. Okay, take care. See you another time. Bye.